Hey, folks, we're going to do the story of Icarus today. Another great and important myth that gets referenced all the time. This one, I'm going to do again a story by James Baldwin, which I edited and arranged, tried to get rid of all the Roman god names and replace them with Greek god names and stuff like that. The Wings of Icarus. If you haven't heard of Icarus, even if you have, pay attention to the story. It probably has details that you missed. So, while Athens was still only a small city, there lived within its walls a man named Daedalus, who was the most skillful worker in wood and stone and metal that had ever lived up until that time. It was he who taught the people how to build better houses and how to hang their doors on hinges and how to support the roofs with pillars and posts. He was the first to fasten things together with glue. He invented the plumb line and the auger. He showed seamen how to put up masts in their ships and how to rig the sails to them with ropes. He built a stone palace for Aegeus. It's where the Aegean Sea gets its name. The young king of Aegeus, the young king of Athens, and beautified the temple of Athena, which stood in the great rocky hill in the middle of the city. Daedalus had a nephew named Perdix, whom he had taken when a boy to teach the trade of builder. But Perdix was a very apt learner and soon surpassed his master in the knowledge of many things. His eyes were ever open to see what was going on about him, and he learned the lore of the fields and the woods. Walking one day by the sea, he picked up the backbone of a great fish, and from it he invented the saw. Seeing how a certain bird carved holes in the trunks of trees, he learned how to make and use a chisel. Then he invented the wheel, which potters use in molding clay, and he made a forked stick, the first pair of compasses for drawing circles, and he studied out many other curious and useful things. Daedalus was not pleased when he saw the lad was so apt and wise, so ready to learn, and so eager to do. "If he keeps on his way," he murmured, "he will be a greater man than I. His name will be remembered, and mine will be forgotten." Day after day, while at his work, Daedalus pondered over this matter, and soon his heart was filled with hatred towards young Perdix. One morning, when the two were putting up an ornament on the outer wall of Athena's temple, Daedalus bade his nephew go out on a narrow scaffold which hung high over the edge of the rocky cliff whereupon the temple stood. Then, when the lad obeyed, it was easy enough with a blow of the hammer to knock the scaffold from its fastenings. Poor Perdix fell headlong through the air, and he would have been dashed in pieces upon the stones at the foot of the cliff had not kind Athena seen him and taken pity upon him. While he was yet whirling through midair, she changed him into a partridge, and he flitted away to the hills to live forever in the woods and fields which he loved so well. And to this day, when summer breezes blow and the wildflowers bloom in meadow and glade, the voice of Perdix may still sometimes be heard, calling to his mate from among the grass and reeds amid the leafy underwoods. Pause. Okay, so this is a story of Daedalus, the inventor, who is incredibly gifted at inventing, and his nephew Perdix, who is also incredibly gifted, and Daedalus gets jealous. He's too prideful, and, in order to maintain his own pride, he decides to murder his nephew. Well, murdering somebody's bad, but murdering a family member is even worse. And he's doing it right on the temple of Athena itself. And so that's pretty bad, like in the sight of the gods. And so Athena saves Perdix and turns him into a partridge. He's falling to his death. This is going to be important. He turns into a bird and flies away. So that's interesting. Also, it explains why we have partridges, I guess. So chapter 2, Minos. As for Daedalus, when the people of Athena heard of his dastardly deed, they were filled with grief and rage. Grief for young Perdix, whom all had learned to love. Rage toward the wicked uncle, who loved only himself. At first, they were for punishing Daedalus with the death which he so richly deserved. That's poetic justice, right? But when they remembered what he had done to make their homes pleasanter and their lives easier, they allowed him to live. And yet they drove him out of Athens and bade him never to return. He's exiled. Get out of our city, never come back. He can't come back to his homeland. There was a ship in the harbor, just ready to start a voyage across the sea, and in it Daedalus embarked with all his precious tools and his young son Icarus. Okay, that's the guy who this is named for, so he's going to be important. Day after day, the little vessel sailed slowly southward, keeping the shore of the mainland always upon the right. It passed Troezen and the rocky coasts of Argos, and then struck boldly across the sea. At last, the famous island of Crete was reached, and there Daedalus landed and made himself known. I'm going to pause for just a second. Let's take a look at a map of the Aegean Sea so you can sort of see what we're talking about here. Okay, so you can see here, but there's Mount Olympus. Here's Athens. Thebes, that's going to come up in a story that we're going to read relatively soon. There's Delphi where the oracle is. But he got in a ship and he sailed south, right? And he kept the mainland always to the left until he reached the island of Crete. So that's sort of, this map is going to come back as we do the Odyssey, and it's something you should just sort of have. And you can see Aegean Sea, named for Aegeus, the king of Athens, and you'll figure out why by the end of the story. Anyway, let's jump here. Actually, I don't think you'll figure out why until you read the story of Theseus and the Minotaur, which is connected to this one. The Minotaur, Minotaur, the chapter 2 here is named Minos. Maybe there's a link there. Anyway, at last the famous island of Crete was reached, and there Daedalus landed and made himself known. And the king of Crete, who had already heard of his wondrous skill, welcomed him to his kingdom and gave him a home in his palace, and promised that he should be rewarded with great riches and honor if he would but stay and practice his craft there as he had done in Athens. Now, the name of the king of Crete was Minos. His grandfather, whose name was also Minos, was the son of Europa, a young princess whom a white bull, it was said, had brought on his back across the sea from distant Asia. This elder Minos had been accounted the wisest of men, so wise indeed that Jupiter, that should say Zeus, let's fix it right now, that Zeus, that's the Roman name for Zeus, chose him to be the judge of the lower world. The younger Minos was almost as wise as his grandfather, and he was brave and far-seeing and skilled as a ruler of men. He had made all the islands subject to his kingdom, and his ships sailed into every part of the world and brought back to Crete the riches of foreign lands. So it was not hard for him to persuade Daedalus to make his home with him and be the chief of his artisans. And Daedalus built for King Minos a most wonderful palace with floors of marble and pillars of granite, and in the palace, he set up a golden statues which had tongues and could talk. I guess they were robots. That's kind of cool. And for splendor and beauty, there was no other building in all the wide earth that could be compared with it. Now, the ruins of this palace of Knossos in Crete still exist. It's interesting. There was a huge Cretan society, and it seemed to have disappeared almost overnight. And people wonder if it's connected with the legend of Atlantis and the lost city of Atlantis, because apparently, at least I've watched a few documentaries, they think that this giant volcano that went off across the sea created a tidal wave that may have washed over the entire island of Crete and just wiped out the civilization there. And that would be an interesting connection if indeed it's true. I don't know whether it is or not. But anyway, the ruins of this palace, theoretically built by Daedalus, actually exist, and you can go check them out if you happen to go to Crete. Let's see. Around that time, a beautiful white bull appeared on the island, sent there by Poseidon as a temptation to Minos' arrogant queen Pasiphae. She became obsessed with this bull, neglecting her duties, her children, and her husband to stand for hours gazing upon it. Though she dared not, she wished to see this beautiful bull from a closer distance. She called Daedalus to her and had him make for her a mechanical suit in the shape of a cow, so lifelike that it would fool anyone seeing it, even the sacred bull. Using this marvelous device, she satisfied her curiosity by venturing into the very pasture with the beast, and thus her obsession passed, and the sacred bull left Crete. That's an interesting passage. Not long after, there appeared among the hills of Crete a terrible monster called the Minotaur, the like of which had never been seen before that time. From that time until now. The creature, it was said, had the body of a man, but the face and head of a bull, and the fierce nature of a mountain lion. Its arrival was shrouded in mystery, but it was known only to the king, his wife, and Daedalus to be the son of Pasiphae, the fruit of her strange obsession. The people of Crete would not have killed the Minotaur if they could, for they believed a rumor spread by Minos himself that the Olympians who lived with Zeus on the mountaintop had sent him among them, and that these beings would be angry if anyone should take his life. He was the pest and terror of all the land. Where he was least expected, there he was sure to be, and almost every day some man, woman, or child was caught and devoured by him. Whoa! All right. So it turns out that the Minotaur, we all know the Minotaur with the head of a bull and the body of a man, sort of the opposite of a centaur, which has the body of a horse and like that head of a, well, I guess has the upper torso and the head of a human. But it's a weird mixed creature. Is the daughter or the son of Pasiphae and this sacred bull that was sent to Crete, and that's disturbing, and probably one of those social taboo myth lessons about things that you shouldn't do, bestiality or whatever. So anyway, what I think is important about this is that this Minotaur now is causing problems all over the island. It's killing and I guess eating people. How is a Minotaur carnivorous? This bothers me. Like, a cow is, it eats grass. Shouldn't a Minotaur just be grazing the fields somewhere? Why is it eating meat? It's weird. Anyway, let's see. Oh, right, where was I? You have done so many wonderful things, said the king to Daedalus, his voice trembling with anger at the builder's part in bringing the Minotaur into existence. Yeah, right, he made the cow costume. Can you not make something to contain the rage of this Minotaur? Shall I kill him? Asked Daedalus. No, said the king, looking at the ground instead of into Daedalus's eyes. That would only bring greater misfortunes upon us. I will build a house for him then, said Daedalus, and you can keep him in it as a prisoner. But he may pine away and die if he's penned up in prison, said the king. He shall have plenty of room to roam about, said Daedalus. If you only now and then feed one of your enemies to him, I promise you that he shall live and thrive. So the wonderful artisan brought together his workmen, and they built a marvelous system of walls and halls beneath the palace. This with so many rooms in it and so many winding ways that no one who went far into it could ever find his way out again. And Daedalus called it the labyrinth. It's where we get the word labyrinth and labyrinthine. If you're ever looking for a vocab word, that's a good one for you. And cunningly persuaded the Minotaur to go into it. The monster soon lost his way among the winding passages, but the sound of his terrible bellowings could be heard day and night as he wandered back and forth, vainly trying to find some place to escape. Which brings us to chapter 3, Icarus. Now, there are lots of versions of that story, and in not a few of them, King Minos feeds the Minotaur all the workers who built the labyrinth, so nobody who knows it ever could escape. The only one who knows all of it is Daedalus himself. Chapter 3, Icarus. Oh, the son that we heard about once that this story's named for. Once the labyrinth was finished, Minos, oh, by the way, Theseus and the Minotaur is obviously a story that we're going to have told to us in a presentation, and that's intimately connected with this story, as you might have guessed. Once the labyrinth was finished, Minos wished Daedalus to build other buildings for him, and then, after his Pasiphae died of sickness, sent him to work on weapons of war, catapults, ballistae, and ways to shoot and throw flame upon enemies. Some even say Daedalus used mirrors and glass to bring the heat of Helios's burning sun down to earth, scorching his enemies. Yes, a death ray. Can't go wrong with that. Minos' passion became expanding his realm across the seas, and the wealth and power of Crete grew so great that the king turned into a twisted tyrant. I guess we're missing an A there. We can fix that too. Fearing, how do I guess I better pay more attention to what I'm doing. Fearing that one day old Daedalus would leave and make weapons for his enemies, Minos called him to a conference in the palace at Knossos. Hitherto, said the king, I have honored you for your skills and rewarded you for your labor, but now you shall be my slave, and shall serve me without hire and without any word of praise. Then he gave orders to the guards to lock Daedalus and his son Icarus inside the tallest tower of the castle and never let him escape. But although the wonderful artisan was thus held as a prisoner, he did not build any more weapons for King Minos. He spent his time in planning how he might regain his freedom. All my inventions, he said to his son Icarus, have hitherto been made to please other people. Now I will invent something to please myself. All through that day, he stood on the balcony of the tower watching the gulls, ravens, and eagles soar free through the sunny sky, wheeling, diving, and rising on currents of air. Pause. This is starting a symbol for us. If you're looking for something in the story that's sort of symbolic, birds represent freedom. Wings represent freedom. And the only other time we've seen wings in the story, by the way, is when Perdix fell off the scaffold and was saved when he turned into a bird. Um, the next day, too, was spent the same way. On the third day, Daedalus pretended to be planning some great work for the king, but every night he locked himself up in the chamber and wrought secretly by candlelight. By and by, he made for himself a pair of strong wings, and for Icarus another pair of smaller ones. And then one midnight, when everybody was asleep, the two went out to see if they could fly. They fastened the wings to their shoulders with wax and then sprang up into the air. They could not fly very far at first, but they did so well that they felt sure of doing much better in time. The next night, Daedalus made some changes to the wings. He put on an extra strap or two. He took out a feather from one wing and put a new feather into another, and then he and Icarus went out into the moonlight to try them again. They did finely this time. They flew up to the top of the king's palace, and then they sailed away over the walls of the city and alighted on top of a hill. But they were not ready to undertake a long journey yet, and so, just before daybreak, they flew back home. Every fair night after that, they practiced with their wings, and at the end of a month, they felt so safe in the air as on the ground and could skim over the hilltops like birds. Early one morning, before King Minos had risen from bed, they fastened on their wings, sprang into the air, and flew out of the city. Once fairly away from the island, they turned toward the west, for Daedalus had heard of an island named Sicily, which lay hundreds of miles away, and he had made up his mind to seek a new home there. All went well for a time, and the two bold flyers sped swiftly over the sea, skimming along only a little above the waves, and helped on their way by a brisk east wind. Toward noon, the sun shone very warm, and Daedalus called out to the boy, who was a little behind him, and told him to keep his wings cool and not fly too high. But the boy was proud of his skill in flying, and as he looked up at the sun, he thought of how nice it would be to soar like it, high above the clouds in the blue depths of the sky. At any rate, he said to himself, I will go up a little higher. Perhaps I can see the horses which draw the sun cart, and perhaps I shall catch sight of the driver, the mighty sun master, Helios himself. And so he rose higher than the clouds, so high that an eagle couldn't climb to his height. Icarus laughed, drunk on the freedom of his wings. In the distance, he saw the tall spire of Olympus above the clouds. Why, with these wings, I am higher than eagles, higher than any man has ever been, and as fast as Hermes. He looped and capered with pure joy. Seeing his son's antics, his father shouted, Icarus, no! The sun will melt your wings! But Icarus only laughed, and then, his heart bursting with ambition and pride, replied, Father, you are the greatest inventor in all the world, including mighty Athena and Hephaestus, too. With these wings you made me, I can fly higher than Olympus and look down on mighty Zeus himself. All right. Pause. The thing that just happened here in this story is a classic Greek thing. The tragic flaw of most Greek heroes is, in fact, called in the Greek hubris, excessive pride. It's so much pride, in fact, that it usually results in mortals comparing themselves to gods or saying that they're better than gods, which, of course, Icarus just did. Not only did he say, I'm going to fly higher than Zeus, which is, like a bad idea, but he also was like, hey, Dad, you're a better inventor than Hephaestus. How is this going to go over when the gods themselves are proud? And you can sort of see how this usually ends up for heroes. There's this saying that goes, pride comes before a fall. You may have heard it before. That saying may or may not have come out of this myth and has also been applied to the fall of Satan in the Bible. But pride comes before a fall. Let's jump back to our myth, shall we? Let's see, where was I? Oh, right. With these wings you made me, I can fly higher than Olympus and look down on mighty Zeus himself. And so he rose higher and higher into the sky until he was only a speck in Daedalus's vision, blurred with tears for what he knew must come next. Sure enough, as Icarus rose, the heat of the sun began to melt the wax with which the boy's wings were fastened. With a sudden lurch, he felt himself sinking through the air. The wings had become loosened from his shoulders. He screamed to his father, pleading for help, but it was too late. Daedalus dove towards his plummeting son, but arrived just in time to see Icarus crash headlong into the waves. The water was very deep there, and nothing but feathers ever rose again to the surface. Daedalus could only look with sorrowing eyes at the unpitying sea and fly on alone to distant Sicily. There, men say, he lived for many years, but he never did any great work nor built anything half so marvelous as the labyrinth of Crete. He felt that his son's death was punishment for his treatment of Perdix, and wept that it was brought about through his own inventions. Though Daedalus gave up his work, it was prophesied that one day a Sicilian man of Syracuse, a descendant of Daedalus, would reach the same heights in wisdom and crafting and be known around the globe as the world's greatest mind. Now, of course, that little last bit is probably an addition made during the time of Rome, because this did happen. There was a guy named Archimedes. You have to look him up. He's pretty awesome. But Archimedes invented, the screw water pump that would like pull water up, and he came up with all kinds of inventions and helped Syracuse hold off Rome for a long time. It's pretty cool. Anyway, he would be the greatest mind that this story is alluding to. But that's something that the ancient Greeks certainly wouldn't have included in the story. This is something that was added in some later version. But hey, let's talk about Icarus and how pride comes before a fall. What lessons come out of this story? I mean, this is a story that is designed, I think, to teach lessons more than anything else. There's a little bit of poetic justice. Daedalus tries to kill his nephew, Perdix. Perdix is falling to his death, turns into a bird, and flies away. And then, as poetic justice for this, Daedalus' son Icarus was a bird and claims to be better than the gods. His wings fall off and he falls to his death. So there's that sort of, I guess, harmony in the story, which comes across loud and clear. But also there are some lessons here. Lesson number one: listen to your elders, right? His dad was like, don't do it. And he was like, okay, boomer, and flew up into the sky, and this is what happens. And so that is an inevitability, I guess, of not listening to your elders, at least according to Greek society. Greek society places a lot of value on elders and listening to them. So I think there's that. But also, if you're looking at the wings as a symbol of freedom, what happens with Icarus is he gets drunk on freedom. He gets too much. Freedom is an interesting word, and I think we often, and especially in America, we misinterpret it and misdefine it. Like somehow freedom is the ability to do whatever you want whenever you want to. But that's not the translation of freedom in ancient Greece. Ancient Greece, freedom translated from the Greek language more literally into self-control, meaning other people aren't in control of you. You're in control of yourself, but control is the part of it. And what Icarus had there in terms of too much freedom is, he went too high, too close to the sun. He became out of control. He was no longer controlling himself. And so ultimate freedom, this ability not to have consequences, that's not a thing. There are natural consequences to every action, and if you don't control yourself, other objects in the world will. You could also look at this as a warning about, I don't know, drugs or whatever. You get too high, what's going to happen? Right, you get too close to the sun, and then. So I think there's lots of ways to sort of look at this metaphor, but this has been a lasting story that has stuck with folks because it teaches lessons, and important lessons about. I guess you don't want to fly too low because you get sprayed by the water, you get too heavy and you crash. You don't want to fly too high because your wings melt. It's about sort of finding that middle ground and controlling yourself and being in it, and all of that kind of stuff. So I'm going to shut up now because we're about 23 minutes, and that's good enough. But I think you see some of the symbols, you see some of the things that are going on here, you see some of the social lessons. It's a good quality myth. I've got another poem for you. This one I'm not gonna spend a ton of time talking about, but I'll put it on here and I'll read it for you. It's called Icarus. It was written in the 1950s by a poet named Henry Fields, or Field. Maybe it's just Field. I'll look it up. But I'm gonna share that poem with you in just a second.